Have you ever sat by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at the yard or the street, and asked yourself, when did everything get so distant? Maybe it's been weeks since your son last called. Maybe your daughter reads your messages, but replies with a one-word answer, or nothing at all. It's not just silence you're hearing. It's a silence that echoes deep. You raised them. You were there for the late-night fevers, the scraped knees, the school plays, and every heartbreak. You gave them your best. And now, suddenly, or maybe slowly over time, they seem to have drifted. And part of you wonders, is it me? Did I do something wrong? Let me tell you right now, if you're feeling this way, you are not alone. So many parents, especially those in their 60s and beyond, are finding themselves in this exact place. The relationships they once had with their children have changed. And when you try to hold on too tightly, it feels like they pull away even more. So what happens if you just stop? What if you stop texting first? Stop calling every Sunday? What if you give them the space they've taken anyway? What happens then? This isn't about revenge or being cold. It's about emotional balance, about reclaiming your peace. Because when you stop chasing contact, something remarkable happens. Not always right away, and not always how you expect, but enough to reveal things you may never have seen before. Let's talk about it, heart to heart. When you stop talking to your kids, one of the first things they often do is nothing. At first it might sting. You might think, wow, I guess they really didn't care. But hold on. It's not always that simple. You see, when a pattern changes, especially one that's been consistent for years, it takes people a little time to register it. They might not notice your silence right away, because they've grown used to you being the one to reach out. You've been the constant in the relationship. So when that constant disappears, the first reaction might not be panic. It's confusion. They'll likely brush it off at first. Mom must be busy. Dad's probably out with his gardening club. But over time, that silence starts to feel louder. You'd be surprised how often your name comes up in their thoughts, even if their actions don't show it yet. Your son might be driving to work and suddenly remember how you used to call every Monday morning just to check in. Your daughter might scroll past an old photo and hesitate, thinking, I should call Mom. But something distracts her. The seed is planted. Silence doesn't mean you've been forgotten. It means you've given space for them to start remembering on their own. And then something else starts to happen. They test the water. It could be a short message out of the blue. Hey, how's the weather? It might be a photo they send with no caption. Or they might react to something you posted on Facebook. Small gestures, seemingly insignificant. But those little nudges, that's their way of saying, I noticed. Now here's the part that's hard, resisting the urge to jump back in too quickly. Because as soon as that message comes, your heart lifts, doesn't it? It's like a little piece of sunlight breaking through the clouds. But take a breath. Let them lead. If they reach out, let it happen naturally. Respond with warmth. Yes, but don't flood them with guilt or pressure. Because if they're reaching out, they're doing something many grown children struggle with, reconnecting without shame. You might also notice a change in how they interact with others. Maybe they suddenly bring up your name in conversations with siblings or friends. I haven't heard from Dad in a while, they'll say. Do you think he's okay? They might not come to you directly, but they'll start checking through other channels. Because here's the truth. When you've always been the anchor, your absence is felt, even if it's not spoken. Sometimes your silence forces them to reflect on the dynamic itself. Maybe they didn't realize how one-sided the communication had become. Maybe they didn't see how much effort you were putting in until it's stopped. And when they start to feel that absence, they also start to question their role in the relationship. That's a powerful shift. I know it can be painful to sit in that silence. You're not doing it to punish them. You're doing it to protect your peace. To say, my time and energy matter too. Because after 60, life takes on new meaning. Your days are just as valuable. Your needs just as real. And then something interesting happens. You start to grow too. You start to reclaim parts of yourself that might have been tucked away while you were busy being someone's parent, someone's provider, someone's constant. Maybe you join that book club you always thought about. Maybe you take up a morning walk without checking your phone for missed messages. And in that stillness, you begin to feel whole again. Not because they called, but because you stopped waiting. That's self-respect. It speaks volumes. It's not loud or flashy, but it carries weight. And children, even adult children, feel it. They may not say it, but they notice when mom or dad seems lighter, more centered. It can even spark curiosity. What's changed? They'll wonder. And that curiosity can lead to new conversations, ones that aren't built on obligation, but on mutual interest. Now, I want to be honest. Not every child will respond the way we hope. Some may take longer. Some may not respond at all. But your decision to stop chasing is not a failure. It's a declaration, a quiet, firm reminder that relationships are a two-way street, that love can be steady without being submissive. You deserve that. At this stage in life, you've earned the right to focus on people who show up for you, not just those you show up for. And if that means taking a step back, then so be it. Sometimes stepping back is the bravest thing you can do. Not to give up, but to give space. Space for growth. Space for clarity. Space for your children to realize something that's easy to forget when love is always given freely. That you are not just mom or dad. You are a person with feelings, boundaries, and worth. And when that realization finally dawns on them, whether it takes days, weeks, or months, it opens a door to something better than constant one-sided communication. Real, intentional connection. When your children start to feel the absence of your voice, it doesn't just register as a missing call or an empty message thread. It lingers. It makes them uncomfortable, even if they don't admit it out loud. Because for so long, they've counted on you to keep that thread alive. You were the one who made sure the relationship didn't go quiet. So when you finally stop doing that, when you stop reaching out, it creates a kind of emotional silence they haven't felt in years. And it makes them think. That's when they start sending what I like to call breadcrumb messages. Maybe it's a short comment on something you posted online. Maybe it's a message that says, "Hope you're doing well," with no context. Or perhaps they suddenly send you a photo from the past, one of those old family snapshots that seems random. But you know there's a reason they picked that one. These small nudges aren't always about conversation. Sometimes they're just their way of testing the waters to see if you're still there, still available to respond. And if you're wondering whether they're doing this on purpose, the answer is yes and no. Some kids are aware of what they're doing. They feel guilty, but they're not sure how to say it out loud. Others don't fully realize they're testing you. It's just emotion doing the steering. Either way, it's not your job to chase that breadcrumb. If they want connection, they need to bring more than crumbs to the table. There may also come a moment when you notice something more subtle. They start talking about you instead of to you. They might say something to a sibling or an old friend like, "I haven't heard from Dad lately. Do you think he's okay?" But they still won't reach out directly. Why? Because part of them is afraid. Afraid that you're mad, afraid that they've hurt you, or maybe even afraid that the distance means you've finally stopped waiting for them. That fear doesn't always lead to immediate action, but it does stir something inside. And sometimes it takes a while for that to rise to the surface. You may also notice another shift. They start performing, not necessarily in a grand, showy way, but in how they present themselves around you. They may act overly cheerful in family group chats, or they'll suddenly mention their recent achievements, hoping you'll notice. That's often a sign that your absence is being felt more deeply than they let on. They're trying to earn your attention again, but without admitting they miss it. At some point, your silence may provoke a completely different kind of reaction. Defensiveness. This can catch you off guard, especially if you weren't expecting it. They might say something like, "Well, I haven't heard from you either." Or "You're the one who disappeared." It's almost like they're flipping the blame, and that can feel hurtful. But here's what's really happening underneath. They feel guilty. They just don't know how to sit with that guilt, so they turn it around. It's a natural human response. When someone feels they failed to show up, it's easier to point out what someone else didn't do. Don't let it rattle you. You know the truth. You know how many holidays you reached out first. How many times you called just to say "I love you" and got a rushed reply. You know the weight you've carried for years to keep the relationship steady. So if they try to rewrite that history in a moment of defensiveness, don't take the bait. Stay calm. Stay steady. Because what they're really saying beneath all that is, "I noticed you stopped, and I'm not sure how to handle that." Now, not all reactions will be defensive or distant. Sometimes your silence wakes up something tender in them. It might not happen quickly, but when it does, it can lead to something truly meaningful. An honest conversation. One where they call and say, "I've been thinking about you." Or they ask, "Have I been distant?" These moments are rare, but they're powerful. Because they're not driven by guilt or obligation. They're driven by awareness. And if that conversation does happen, if they reach out with sincerity, try to meet them with openness, not with old pain. That doesn't mean you erase the past or pretend everything's fine, but it does mean you give the relationship a chance to grow from here. Because growth only happens when both people are willing to own their part. And sometimes, your silence is the only thing that gets them to that place of reflection. But let's also talk about the harder truth. Sometimes the silence doesn't draw them closer. It reveals something else entirely. Just how one-sided things have become. There are parents who give everything, time, energy, forgiveness, and get very little in return. When the calls stop, when the texts aren't answered, and you finally decide to pull back, no one comes looking, and that hurts deeply. If you find yourself in that space, I want you to know something. Their silence is not your failure. Some people, children included, simply aren't ready to face what a real relationship requires. They're caught up in their own lives, their own egos, their own avoidance. That doesn't mean you didn't do enough. It means they still have growing to do. And maybe, just maybe, it's not your job to keep trying to help them grow. Not anymore. That realization can be heartbreaking, but also freeing, because it gives you permission to stop trying so hard, to stop measuring your worth by their responses. You're allowed to live a full, joyful, meaningful life, whether they choose to be a part of it or not. You don't stop loving them, but you can love from a distance. You can love with healthy boundaries. You can love without sacrificing your peace. You may also discover, in this silence, a version of yourself you haven't seen in a long time. Someone who isn't always waiting. Someone who has her own mornings to enjoy, his own hobbies to explore. Someone who can smile without needing approval or validation from anyone, not even your own children. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect. And at this stage in life, that's a beautiful thing to reclaim. The truth is, your value was never in how much you gave, how much you chased, or how many times you reminded them to call. Your value is in who you are, fully, wholly, unapologetically. And if your kids don't see that right now, it's okay. They may see it later, they may not. But you don't need to put your life on hold waiting for that moment, because there's still laughter to be had, friends to connect with, new recipes to try, books to read, places to visit, joy to feel. You've got a lot of life left, and it doesn't need to revolve around anyone who can't meet you where you are. There's a kind of peace that shows up after the noise settles, after the waiting, the wondering, the hoping. It's quiet, yes, but not empty. It's the kind of quiet that gives you room to hear yourself again, to listen to your own needs, not just theirs. That's the beauty of letting go of the chase. It brings you back to you. But just when you begin to find that balance, something unexpected may happen. Your child returns, but not with a heartfelt apology or a flood of emotion. No, it's quieter than that. They come back on their terms. Maybe it's a "hey" text out of nowhere, a comment on your photo, a quick phone call where they ask about the weather but not how you've been feeling. It's not cold, but it's distant, casual, as if nothing happened. And that can be confusing, can it? After all the silence, all the soul-searching, here they are, just slipping back in like nothing changed. No acknowledgement of the gap. No recognition of what their absence meant to you. That's not closure. That's a test. This is where many parents stumble. Because the love is still there. The yearning for connection never truly leaves. And when that door creaks open even a little, we want to run through it. Wrap them in warmth and pretend the pain didn't happen. But slow down. Take a breath. Ask yourself, are they truly coming back? Or just making sure the door is still unlocked? You have every right to want a relationship with your child. That's natural. But you also have the right to expect effort, respect, honesty, a relationship that doesn't only show up when it's convenient for them. Because you're not just someone to check in with when they're bored or lonely or feeling uncertain. You are a whole person, and you deserve to be seen as such. So when they reach out without explanation, without real engagement, ask yourself, do I respond with the same energy? Or do I keep the door open only for those who knock with intention? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Not to punish, but to protect your peace. If they want to come back into your life, they'll have to do it with more than breadcrumbs. They'll need to bring presence, authenticity, accountability. Now, here's something you might not expect. If they realize their usual ways of reconnecting no longer work, if the casual text doesn't reel you back in, if you're not quick to jump into old patterns, they might try something else. They may try to make you feel jealous. No, not in the same way young couples do. But it happens. Suddenly, they're telling you how much closer they've gotten to someone else. Maybe their in-laws, maybe a new mentor, maybe a friend they call like a second mom. It might come up in passing, but the tone is deliberate. It's a way of saying, look who's filling the space you used to occupy. And that can cut deep. But if you look closely, that tactic says more about them than it does about you. If they truly felt secure in those relationships, they wouldn't need to mention them to you. They wouldn't need you to see them happy with someone else. Because true connection doesn't need to be advertised. It just is. This again is a test, a way of gauging your reaction. If you respond with hurt, or try to prove your worth, or beg for a bigger piece of their life, they've succeeded in shifting the power back. But if you stay centered, if you smile, nod, and keep your emotional balance, they feel it. And whether they say it or not, they start to understand. You're no longer available for games. Now, not every child is doing this consciously. Some are simply navigating their own guilt, shame, or emotional immaturity. Others are scared to face the full weight of reconnection. Vulnerability isn't easy for everyone, but it's not your job to carry that for them. Not anymore. If they want healing, they have to walk toward it, not wait for you to pull them. And you, after all the years, all the effort, you get to choose how much you're willing to hold. You get to draw the line between love and self-sacrifice. Eventually, a different moment may come. One that looks at first glance like closure. They stop trying altogether. No more breadcrumb messages. No more drive-by texts. They stop reaching out, stop watching your stories, stop testing your silence. And your first thought might be, they've really moved on. But pause for a moment. Because moving on doesn't always mean healing. And silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes when your kids stop trying, it's not because they've forgotten you. It's because they don't know how to return without confronting their own behavior. It's easier to stay away than to face the mirror, especially if they're afraid of what they'll see. So they keep their distance. Maybe they even build a new life. They find distractions, new people. They post pictures that look happy. But deep down, there's still a quiet space where your presence once lived. You might never see that space. They might never say it out loud. But that doesn't make it any less real. And if they truly do move on, if they're able to walk away and never look back, then that's something you can't control. But what you can control is how you hold yourself, how you fill your own life, how you walk forward with your head high and your heart intact. Because this life you have, this season of slower mornings, of deeper reflection, of more intentional living, is still full of possibility. Whether your children come around or not, you still have time to experience joy, connection, purpose. You still have something to give and something to receive. You don't have to shrink yourself to stay in someone's life, least of all your own child's. Love should never require silence, or surrender, or emotional guessing games. It should feel like peace, like home. And if they ever come back, truly come back, you'll know. You'll hear it in their voice. You'll feel it in their presence. Not just a call on Mother's Day or a birthday card in the mail, but real conversation, real care, real change. Until then, you owe it to yourself to live fully. To love yourself just as fiercely as you once loved them. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started caring for you. You don't need to chase anyone. You don't need to prove your worth. You've already done the work, poured in the love, shown up time and time again. Now, it's your turn. Your time. When you finally reach this place, this quiet, grounded space, you begin to realize something that takes many of us a lifetime to learn. Your peace is not a product of who shows up, but of what you let go. You let go of the need for constant contact. You let go of the responsibility to always keep the relationship alive. You let go of the pressure to be the fixer, the forgiver, the forever open door. And in that release, you reclaim your dignity. There's nothing weak about walking away from one-sided love. It doesn't make you bitter. It makes you brave. And something shifts too, not just in your relationship with your children, but in the way you see yourself. You start showing up differently. You carry yourself with quiet strength. You stop seeking validation in text message bubbles or hoping your phone will light up with their name. You stop waiting for permission to feel joy, and the world notices. You meet new people. You reconnect with old friends. You begin saying yes to invitations again, even if it's just for lunch or a walk at the park. You laugh a little more. You rest a little better. You start living, not for anyone else, but for you. And here's the most beautiful part. When you live like that, some of your children might finally see what they were too distracted to recognize before. They'll feel it in your absence, in the quiet confidence you carry now. They'll realize that your love was never the problem. It was the way they took it for granted. Some will step forward with humility. They'll acknowledge the distance. They'll ask to rebuild. And if that happens, you'll know exactly how to respond. Not from hurt, but from wisdom. You'll be able to welcome them without losing yourself in the process. Because you've already learned that your identity isn't tied to how much you give. It's found in how well you love yourself too. Others may stay distant. Maybe they never come back the way you hoped. And that will ache, I won't lie. The heart never really stops hoping when it comes to our kids. But even then, you still win. Because you refused to let someone else's silence define your worth. You gave them life. You gave them love. You gave them years of patience, guidance, support, and forgiveness. And now, you give yourself something just as sacred. Permission to grow without them. That might mean finally starting that garden you've dreamed of, or taking that weekend trip you've kept putting off. It might mean joining a club, volunteering, or learning something new just because it makes you feel alive again. You begin filling your days not with longing, but with purpose. And slowly, those empty spaces you once filled with worry or regret begin to bloom with something else. Freedom. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from obligation. Freedom from chasing people who only remember you when they need something. You no longer measure your value by how much someone calls or how often they visit. You measure it by the joy you feel when you wake up each morning knowing your time, your love, and your peace are no longer for sale. And maybe, just maybe, that example becomes the lesson your children were always meant to learn. Not from your words, but from your strength. Because at the end of the day, our children don't just listen to what we say, they absorb how we live. So let them see a version of you that is whole, a version that is gentle, but firm, kind, but no longer a doormat, loving, but not endlessly self-sacrificing. Let them see what it looks like when a parent chooses themselves after years of choosing everyone else. That image of you thriving, laughing, living fully might be the very thing that brings them back. Not because you begged, but because you stopped. And whether they return or not, you will have already won. Because you remembered what so many people forget in this life, that love isn't something you have to chase. It's something you offer freely. And when it's not returned in kind, you keep your arms open, but you don't lose yourself waiting. So, to anyone watching who feels forgotten, overlooked, pushed aside, let me say this. You matter. Your presence matters. Your peace matters. And your best years, they aren't behind you. They are still unfolding, moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. So choose yourself. Choose joy. Choose a life that feels full, even if the people you thought would be beside you aren't always there. You've already carried so many. It's okay to carry yourself now. And if you found this message helpful, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what this brought up for you. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you haven't already, please click like and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life. We talk about real things here, the kind that matter when you've lived a little, loved a lot, and learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks just like you. Here's to living your best life at any age. You deserve nothing less.